Hi guys and welcome back. As you might have noticed from my community posts, I'm very much looking into swapping core components of my test bench. Not sure I can call this an upgrade, but in this video we are going to take a look at what the foreseeable future of testing here at Nexus Tech looks like. Warning, this might be longer than usual, so for those who are tight on time, please use the timestamps provided in the video description. However, if you can, please consider not skipping. I want to hear your valuable feedback. For those who are new, this channel started with a wild eBay purchase of a STRIX X99 gaming motherboard. It came with an i9-10850K and served me well until I stumbled across another eBay listing. Maybe I should just delete the app and finally live in peace. Last April I made a video covering the update, and understandably, not many choose to watch it. That time I replaced the X99 for a Z490 motherboard running an Intel Core i9-10850K. Even though I really wanted the 10900K, the bundle came at the right price and I pulled the trigger. Faster single core performance and higher clock speed should generally benefit games, I thought to myself, and they did. Honestly, this more modern platform gave me no trouble, and I think it's actually a pretty sensible choice even nowadays. But being sensible didn't last long, and when I recently wanted to test quad SLI with two GTX 690s and I couldn't get it to work, I knew it's time to go to HEDT again. I really underestimated this, especially knowing my plans for this year and how much hardware I already had on hand I wouldn't be able to test. With mere 16 PCI lanes, the 10850K is simply not suited for multi-GPU setups. It comes from a time where SLI or Crossfire was no longer required or even considered, and a single card does make the most sense, and I do agree. But enough talking about past, here's the plan. I purchased a second-hand Gigabyte X299 motherboard, shout out to my mate Aaron who got it for me. It came with a 10-core Skylake X i9-10900X, which has all the PCI lanes required, but is simply too slow when compared to 10850K. After doing some research, I settled on a Cascade Lakes i9-10900X. For a bit of fun, I also threw my Ryzen 9 3900X into the comparison, since it's powering my main rig and I'm genuinely interested to see how it compares for productivity. The 10900X is nearly 1 year older and was more expensive to buy at $649 USD. Both CPUs are made on 40nm process and have 10 cores, 20 threads. The newer 10850K benefits from higher boost clock and touch more level 3 cache, whilst also offering lower TDP. On the other hand, the 10900X offers 48 PCI lanes, supports quad-channel memory and doubles the supported capacity, along with a support for AVX 512. It lacks an integrated GPU, but that's okay with me, after all, I have a 210 for that, don't I? First major change going forward, all of the future CPU testing will be separated into categories and should be easily replicated if you ever wanted to compare your machine. Let's start with productivity. Cinebench R23 multi-threaded score is in favour of my 12-core Ryzen with nearly 18,000 points. The 10900X is only marginally slower than the 10850K, but about 10% slower in a single-threaded test. Next up is 7-zip dictionary test. The 10850K does slightly better in decompression, and the 10900X is better in the compression test. Cycle's car demo in Blender sees virtually identical results of 2 minutes and 21 seconds between the two. Ryzen 3900X is faster again thanks to those extra 2 cores. Lastly, I looked at the encode times in Handbrake and its fast 1080p 30 preset. I used my own 9TB 11-minute 4K video file as the source. The 10850K was slightly quicker and got the job done 33 seconds faster than the 10900X. Once again, both were slightly behind the 3900X. Let's take a look at power consumption and thermals next. The idle power consumption measured by 10-minute average using hardware info shows the 10850K as the most efficient at just 24.5 watts. Both 3900 and the 10900X were around 45 watts. Prime 95 small FFTs are the worst case scenario for power consumption, and here are the 10-minute averages recorded. Again, the 10900X comes as the worst of the bunch, with average power consumption of 281 watts, followed by the 10850K and 264 watts consumed. The Ryzen 3900X was sipping just 131 watts. Please note, both Intel CPUs are overclocked and might be more efficient at stock. However, it is very difficult to draw a line here since the 10th gen boost durations are weird, and the way motherboard manufacturers impose their own limits is a topic for another time and maybe an entire video. Ryzen had the PBO enabled, but seemed to be running on stock limits. Looking at the CPU package power shows a flat line of the 10900X and somehow steady increase with the 10850K. The average effective clock shows just how much more aggressive the clocks of the 10850K are when compared to 10900X or the 3900X. Next proposed change is to use Arctic's Liquid Freezer 360 for all CPU benchmarks. That way the results are consistent. It sadly lacks support for LGA 1366 and LGA 775, but otherwise has great cooling potential. Another change comes with the game testing. I'm going to use RTX 3080 to avoid bottlenecks and use the same graphical settings to keep it consistent, unlike in the past. 3DMark's time spy using RTX 3080 shows around 6% difference between the two chips. I really wonder how is this going to scale with some of the older i7s I have lined up. I've picked 12 games that feature built-in benchmark to keep it fair between the runs, and I've tested 1080p, 1440p and also 2160p or the 4K. The footage shown is from 1080p run. First, it's Deus Ex Mankind. Overall, the 10850K pushed significantly faster average FPS and saw high utilization of the GPU by about 10%. This resulted in nearly 30% higher FPS at 1080p and 1440p. Gap narrowed at 4K, where both chips offered similar performance with less than a 5% of a difference. Dirt Rally runs really well even on lower end hardware. 10850K was pushing around 30% more FPS on average, and I saw virtually identical results across all resolutions. F1 2018 is a great game to test your CPU performance. Benchmark results show 15% difference at 1080 and 1440p, and the gap then narrowed to just 10% at 2160p. The much relaxing benchmark of FarCry 3 was next, and it also followed the trend. 10900X was around 20% slower up to 1440p and then 8% slower at 4K. Forza Horizon 4 saw 15% difference between the two CPUs up to 1440p. However, the 1% lows were significantly lower with the 10900X and across all the resolutions. Not sure what might have caused it. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was next, and sadly, the much lower 1% low FPS trend of the 10900X continued here too. The average FPS was nearly identical at 4K, and at this point it would be safe to say that there is a pattern that these two follow. Another great game for CPU testing is Rainbow Six running Vulkan. The 10850K was faster by about 18%, and as ever, the gap narrowed to 7% at 4K. Up next, it's Red Dead Redemption 2 using Vulkan. Drums please! The 1080p benchmark was the first and also the last time the 10900X pushed higher average FPS. To be fair, both CPUs were closely matched and I was pleased with the results. Modern Warfare 2 with Ultra preset liked the newer 10850K more, but only by about 7% at 1080p and 1440p. 4K proved to be quite a challenge and results were nearly identical. Alien Isolation is a fairly old game nowadays, however it still remains on my list of benchmarks. With under 3% of difference, this was really close and I'm pleased to see that. In FarCry 6, 10850K takes the usual lead by around 19% up to the 1440p. No surprise at 4K, the gap drops to just under 9%. Last game tested was Cyberpunk 2077. Here, the 10900X is slower by around 7% across all 3 resolutions. Based on the 12 games we've tested, the 10900X is slower than 10850K by around 17% on average at 1080 and 1440p, and just 8% slower at 4K. I think this game testing provided solid evidence and revealed what the 10900X is capable of. Generally speaking, it's considerably slower at lower resolutions and in older games. The newer the game and higher the resolution, the lower the gap is. I will admit that is not great, but at least it's all supported by results and not just my speculations. I will of course spend more time overclocking and hope to push it faster still. Regardless of what you might have to say, I'm going ahead with the 10900X. Yes, it's slower where it hurts, but think about all those sweet Crossfire and SLI tests that are coming up. I cannot wait. I hope you like my proposed CPU testing methods. I would like to better highlight generational differences, and by using more tools and standardized testing, this should be possible. With all of this in mind, up next is a major test bench overhaul, so stay tuned for that. As ever, if you do enjoy my content, give it a like and consider subscribing. Both are much appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.